it here.
Okay, so we are on Memhei of the days. We just started discussing, because again, just to review, we know that to make a kinyan, money doesn't make a kinyan. You have to have a chayfetz, an object. In the case of Maser Sheni, when someone exchanges Maser Sheni for money, then the Maser Sheni has to be exchanged, and the money then follows suit, and becomes an obligation to pay the money, even if you don't pay it right away. But it's the chayfetz, the fruit, the Maser Sheni, that triggers the transaction. So the Gemara started here in this sugya to ask the question, wait a minute, you're telling me that money can't be part of it, it can't trigger an exchange. Why not? If money is part of a chalipin, part of an exchange, we know chalipin means sort of a barter, if you will, or a kinyan sudar that we talked about, like we do on Pesach, for chometz. So if you have a kinyan sudar or you have a chalipin, then money can be a trigger for an exchange. So why do you say categorically that money can't be? That was the Gemara's question. That's when we pivoted to where we are, and then just to review, we said Itma Rav Levi, that Rav Levi had a machlokes whether matbeh nasa chalipin or not. So according to the Papa says that according to the one that a matbeh nasa chalipin, he advances the idea that the reason why you can't be chalipin is because money is unstable, because the value of money is not necessarily the value of its metal, but it's the value of the coin that the government says is worth 50 cents, $1, $2, whatever it is, or more. And since that can be changed, it can be rubbed out, or the government can say, I'm withdrawing this coin, it's no longer $1 from circulation. So there's an uncertainty. Whereas with chalipin, and of course we learned chalipin from Rus, where they exchanged a shoe. A shoe is a mitzias. It's a hard and fast mitzias. You can't undo a shoe. A shoe is worth whatever it's worth, but it's a chayfetz. So you have to have a chayfetz for chalipin, and according to the Mandama, you can't use money for chalipin. It's not a chayfetz because it's unstable. A chayfetz has to be stable, like a shoe. But if it's money, and money is at the whim of the government, it is valuable, it has no value, you can't use it. Okay, so that was how we established what we said. So let's just quickly, we'll start with Tanan. We did this, but this will be a good introduction back into our Gemara. It's about maybe, I don't know, 15, 16 or so lines, the second word. So after the Mandama who says that you can't have Philippine because of Tsurta, because the Tsurta Avida de Batla can be destroyed, says, quoting our Mishnah, Tanan Hazov Kaines Akesef, our Mishnah says, my la b'chalipin. Why don't you say it's b'chalipin? B'shma mina matbeh nasa chalipin. So the Gemara says, lo b'domin, that our Gemara, which we've been learning till now, has to be with money, not with chalipin, and therefore money is not of value. Frank the Gemara, Ihocha Hazov Kaines Akesef Mechayev Maboyale. Why does it say Hazov Kaines Akesef that money buys that gold buys silver? It should say it obligates silver, because remember, what are we saying here? We're saying that when you transact produce, Maser Sheni, and you make a kinyan, then the money becomes obligated. You don't have to pay the money that instant. It becomes obligated. You can pay it now, a week from now, a month from now, but you have to know that that money becomes an obligation that you owe to the person who's selling you the Maser Sheni. So why does the Gemara say Hazov Koines Akesef? Koine means that you buy it. When you buy something, you pay for it. I mean, there's no layaway plan here. You're buying Maser Sheni, you pay the money, the transaction is complete. If you say you don't have to pay the money, you can be obligated, and the money can be paid down the road. Then what does the Gemara say specifically? Mechayev, Hazov Mechayev is Akesef. That's what we said last week. Then it's the wrong terminology. The terminology of kinyan means it happens now. The terminology of mechayev means obligation. And we're saying that you don't have to do more than obligate. So why does the Gemara, in other words, the Gemara here is trying to show, you're saying that our Mishnah is about damim, about money. If it's damim, then it should say, then why does it say kaina? It should say mechayev, because money is obligated down the road. So the Gemara answers that Tana Hazov mechayev hachinam mistabra. So he says that when the Gemara says kaina, it means obligation. It's a little bit of a stretch, but the Gemara wants to tell us that, the text sometimes expresses itself in a way that they're not as meticulous as they should be. And we find this in the Gemara, that when the Gemara uses the word kaina, in this case, it doesn't mean just kaina, it means mechayev. Now you can say, oh, that's a backhanded answer, and it sort of kind of like waters down the theory, because it's either kaina or mechayev. It's not both. Says the Gemara, no, it is both. That kaina can mean mechayev. That's what he wants to say, and he's going to bring proof. Okay, so that's where we stopped. So now we're going to bring proof that when the Gemara says kaina es hakesef, it can also mean mechayev, which allows us to say that we're talking about damim and not chalipin, right? That's the key here. What is our Mishnah talking about? We want to try, and the Gemara is going to try now several times as we go forward to say, well, no, we're really talking about chalipin, and we're proving that money can be used for chalipin, but the Gemara is saying, no, in this particular case, it's not chalipin, it's damim, and when it says kaina, it means mechayev. Okay, so now we're going to bring, so now the Gemara wants to bring a proof to what it just said, that money can say kaina, but mean mechayev. Midik tani seifa, the seifa of our Mishnah, what is a seifa? Ha-kesef and a kaina sazov. Now the seifa of our Mishnah flips the script and says, zov kaina es ha-kesef, but kesef ain't a kaina es hazov. That silver, in other words, making a kinyan on silver cannot make the kinyan on zov. What does that mean to say? That since kesef is money, and money cannot make a kinyan, so on its bold face, it would seem that we're talking about damim, we're talking about a sale, not a chalipin, because otherwise, why does the Mishnah say a kesef ain't a kaina sazov? Now, says the Gemara, if you say that we're really speaking about a sale, then it's correct to say that what? That a kesef ain't a kaina sazov. Why? Because dava pira, the amrina dava pira v'kaspa tava v'tava pira loikani. That gold is produce and silver is money, and money can't be kaina produce. Okay, that makes sense. That's why it says a kesef, which means silver money, can't make the kinyan for kesef. But if the Mishnah was really talking about chalipin and proving that money can be used for chalipin, travaya likna hadadi, then the Mishnah should say, you know what? What does the Mishnah say in the Reisha zov koines hakesef, and in the Sefer kesef ein of koines hazov? It should say travaya kaina lahadadi. You can use kesef or zahav as your trigger, and it includes the reciprocal, right? Because in chalipin, it wouldn't matter if it was the kesef that was moved or the zahav that was moved, because if you hold that kesef is really an item that can be used for chalipin, then what do we care if you initiated it with kesef, with silver? You're allowed to. Teretz is that no, we're talking about damim, we're not talking about chalipin. And if you look at it from the standpoint that kesef is really money, not an item of exchange, then it makes sense to say hazov, which is produce, koines hakesef, and kesef, which is money, ain't a koines hazov. So that's what the Gemara is saying. That's the proof in the Mishnah that we're talking. Our sugya is talking about damim and not chalipin, because chalipin would come out different. Okay, so that's kind of proof positive. And now the Gemara is going to go on weiter and say, no, I don't necessarily agree with that proof, and is going to show us differently. Okay. Now, another proof, the Gemara is going to go further and tell us that we're not talking about Chalipin, because it seems like the Gemara wants to be able to wedge in here that Chalipin, money, can be used for Chalipin, and you can't make the broad statement that money can never be used to initiate a transaction. In the case of Damim, we know it can't initiate a transaction because we know you have to have produce. But if you're not using the money as Damim, as a purchase, but only as an exchange, then you should be able to initiate a transaction with Kesef. And that's what the Gemara keeps trying and saying, you brought a raya. No, let's look at it from a different angle. So that's clearly what the Gemara is trying to do, is trying to exhaust the opportunities to show that silver is, that we're not talking about Chalipin, and therefore silver cannot be the trigger for a transaction. Okay, and another proof to that, Tanya, we learned in Abraisa, HaKesef Eina Kaina Es Azov. We learned in Abraisa that says that Kesef cannot purchase Zov. What's shot in that Braisa? Kesad. What's the case? So the Gemara is going to explain to us that Braisa. The Braisa says, Mochaloi Esron B'chamisha Dina Shel Kesef B'Dina Shel Zov. If one person was transacting with another and he sells him 25 silver pieces for one gold piece, right? That's the Braisa. Afa Pisha Moshe Chesa Kesef, even though he made Meshicha. In this case, Meshicha means Hagbal. He didn't have to push it. He lifted it. Even though he lifted the Kesef, Lo Kana, he's not Kaina Yimshach Hazazov. So that's the Braisa. So he's not Kaina until he actually does Meshicha on the Zohar. Zok the Braisa. That says the Gemara. If we are talking truly about Damim, then it's a monetary exchange. Now we understand why he's not Koneh, because silver is money and gold is produce, and you can only make a king in a monetary exchange, meaning a sale, you can only trigger the sale with an item, not with money. So then it makes sense why that Braisa says that if someone wants to transact 25 silver pieces for one gold piece, it's not enough. You don't trigger it with moving the silver. You've got to move the gold. You've got to actually move the gold, because that is the product. But if we're truly talking about Chalipin, which is not a sale, remember, an exchange is not a sale, even though it looks like a sale, because if let's say we're in a barter economy and I give you one thing, you give another, then you would call that a sale on its face, because we're trading and each one winds up with a different item. The Gemara doesn't call that a sale. The Gemara says a sale is different than an exchange. So we have to sort of in our minds say that there is that chilik. So, and the point being that in an exchange, you can use money to trigger an exchange. But here, the Gemara says in that Braisa specifically that if someone made the Meshicha or the Hagbah on silver, it doesn't trigger the deal. The only way it cannot trigger the deal is if it's a sale, because if it's an exchange, it should trigger the deal. So that's the proof that the Gemara says, you know what? We're talking about a sale. We're always talking about a sale, and therefore the initiation has to be with the gold, i.e., the produce, and not the silver, which is the money. So he says, "Eliyamet b'chalipa nikna," then it would be different. Okay, so the Gemara shows from a Braisa that we have to be talking about damim because of the language of the Braisa. Okay, we have to accept that. Now the Gemara goes further and says, wait a minute, even that Braisa I'm going to question. And this is, again, the Gemara is just, it doesn't want to let go and wants to get to the very nub of it. And so now we're going to try to slug up that Braisa. Elamai bedamim, So now, okay, you have to say that we're talking about dumbing. Why? Because why can't you exchange? Why can't you make the kinyan on the silver instead of the gold? So Ketza. So the Gemara says, what's the case? Okay, Ihacha Ema Reisha. Let's look at the Reisha, the first part of that brisa. What's the first part of that brisa? Okay, the Reisha says Hazov Koines Akes. That it's similar to our Mishnah. In other words, it mirrors our Mishnah, but it has a different circumstance, right? The exchange of 25 for 1 is not in our Mishnah, it's in the Brisa. So now this Brisa is going to flip the script. What's the ratio of the Brisa? Azov Kainis Akesef. It says Azov Kainis Akesef Ketza. What's the example of Zov being Kainis Akesef? So he says, Mochaloi Dina Shel Zov Be'esrim Chamisha Dina Shel Kesef. Now it's the opposite. He sells one dinar of Zov for 25 silver pieces, because 25 silver pieces would be the equivalent of a gold. So in the Sefer, we said he sold the 25 silver for 1 gold. Now in the ratio, we're talking about selling 1 gold for 25 silver, the opposite event. So what happens? This is critical. So what does the Brisa say? That since he made the Meshicha, the Hagbah, on the Zov, on the gold, then the silver automatically follows suit. And there it adds the words, B'chol Makom Shehu, wherever it is. Okay, so let's stop and think about it. You have an exchange. You and I are sitting here in Kemp Mill, and we're exchanging 1 gold for 25 silver. So l'chayra, we're sitting together. I have the gold, you have the silver. We should make that transaction, and we should immediately exchange. I should get the silver, you should get the gold, everything good, and we go home. But that's not what the price is saying. The price is saying, you and I are sitting together, we're making a transaction, and you're going to make a Meshicha on the Zov, but the silver is not sitting here with me. The silver is in my lockbox somewhere else. It's not here. So the Brisa says, and this is now, it's nuanced, but it's important, that Kivin Shem Moshech has Zov, since the one party made the Mashiach on the Zov, Nik the Kesef B'chol Makom Shehu, he's kind of the Kesef wherever it is. It's not here, it's in the lockbox. The lockbox could be in another state, it could be wherever it is. Now, why is that significant? If you say that our Brisa is talking about B'chalipin, so that language of B'chol Makom Shehu makes sense. Why? Because what do we say by Chalipin? By Chalipin, we say it's an exchange, and you're automatically kind of right away, right? That was the major distinction between Damim and Chalipin. With Chalipin, you're kind of right away. With Damim, it's only an obligation for later on. So if you say we're speaking about Damim, that's, I understand when the Gemara says B'chol Makom Shehu, because it's not here. You can't make a kinyan on it. You can't move the silver, which would be the kinyan, because it's in a lockbox somewhere else. Fine. So the Gemara says B'chol Makom Shehu, but that presents the opportunity to say that that's Chalipin, not Damim, because B'chol Makom Shehu means that you automatically are kind of it even without making a kinyan. Because remember, in an exchange, the other party does not have to make a kinyan, right? The other party doesn't have to make a kinyan because either party in a chalipin can initiate the transaction and the other party automatically owns it. It's only in damim that it becomes an obligation and you don't have to make the exchange. In chalipin, it's right away. So why does the Gemara says B'chol Makom Shehu, which seems to suggest that there's a specific amount of money and it's sitting in a lockbox and you don't have access to it, but it's yours. If it's yours, then it means it's chalipin. Because how is it yours? How can specifically designated money that you're exchanging for this gold coin become yours if you can't make a kinyan on it? That should be clear here, that's exactly what the Gemara is saying. And if that's the case, then again, why are you telling me that our Brisa is not talking about chalipin has to be damim? We see from the language of the Brisa that says b'chol makom shehu that it is chalipin, because that's exactly what chalipin is. That the money, this specific money, becomes yours right now without a kinyan. So again, the Gemara is probing here and still asking the question, why do you say that our Brisa brings a raya that it's damim, that has to be money? It doesn't have to be money. Our Brisa can be talking about chalipin, because the Brisa says expressly that when you make the kinyan on the zohar, the silver becomes yours b'chol makom shehu, which means that it's now yours. And that can only be by chalipin, not by damim.
So Rabbi, is this a case where exchange, it seems to imply that the definition of exchange means what you're exchanging for, both sides have to be available in exchange now, which overrides the context of whether in the case of gold or silver, one is the monetary equivalent, and the other
Correct.
one is the item to exchange. So does this become the dominant point in an exchange, that it has to be there and available?
Exactly the point, Michael. You've drawn it out beautifully. In other words, till now, we're saying that if it's damim, zahav is produce, silver is money. You can only initiate the transaction with produce, not money. And therefore, you have to make the meshicha or the hagbah on gold because it's the produce. But you're exactly right. In the case of chalipin, where silver is not exchanged because it's money, it's exchanged as an item. It's an item, just like gold is an item. Then it has to be here. So if it's here, then I give you the gold, you give me the silver, and the silver is mine automatically. Since the Gemara is saying that Brisa uses the term that the exchange of the gold gives you the silver wherever it is, meaning that wherever it is, it's yours, then you don't have to do a kinyan. And that can only be by chalipin, because otherwise it's an obligation. It's not an actual transaction, it's an obligation. And the Gemara doesn't say it's an obligation. It says, kaina es hakesef b'chol makom shehu. And therefore, even if it's somewhere totally where you don't have access to it, it's yours now. That presupposes chalipin, not damim. And if that's the case, then we have a kasha again. Why are we insistent that our discussion is only about damim? The Gemara, again, this is the approach of the Gemara. It wants to insert and say that our Gemara can really be talking about chalipin, and therefore it shows that silver can be used in exchange as chalipin, as opposed to damim, where silver cannot ever be the trigger. Here in chalipin, it can be the trigger. Exactly what you say, Mike. Right. So this is the kasha. Again, the Gemara is asking, we see it's a proof. So it says, right? Again, we're back to the same point. Why does it say that it's nikna b'chol makom shehu? If we're talking about money, it should say nischayev gavra. It obligates the person, and that whenever he gets around to it, he'll collect his money, but it's not his money now. Why are we harping on this point? And the point is, let's take it a step further. If we make a transaction and I say, okay, the transaction's on gold, and I'm obligated now to pay you the silver, but you can collect the silver a month from now. You have an opportunity for a great deal, business deal, but you need money. Now, you want to go to Levi, the person not part of this transaction, you want to tell him, you know what? you're offering me a great deal on stuff you brought from China. I want to give you the silver and buy it from you. Wait a minute. You want to buy my product that I just bought and get it real cheaply because you want to give me money that you don't yet own. Why don't you own it? Because it was an obligation. You were given an obligation that you can exercise your right to get the silver, but it's not your silver. So you can't use that silver to buy something from somebody else because it's not your silver. If it was chalipin and you owned it right away and Levi made you an offer that you can't refuse, then you could say, I have this money. I just got it in chalipin. It's mine. I'm giving it to you to buy your produce. But if it's damim, if it's actual money that you're supposed to get, and you have an obligation, you don't own the money, you have an obligation to get the money, then you can't use that money for another transaction. That's a huge nafkamina between chalipin and damim. Because in damim, you can't use the money that's obligated to buy something because you haven't acquired the money yet. You haven't made a kinyan on the money for you to say, oh, this is now my money. I can spend it the way I want and buy this chayfetz. In chalipin, we don't have to worry about that because it's an automatic transfer of money. It's like, today, the money is instantly wired into your account. It's sitting in your account. Now you can use it. Right? That's a chilek.
Rabbi, what is the case if you are using gold to buy gold jewelry? So in that case, you have gold, which is by all definitions monetary, but you're exchanging it for a different form of gold, so to speak. I use the word exchange. Is that a sale or an exchange? Does it matter if they're both there at the same time or not? I mean, what is the dominant difference between a sale and
You're
exchange?
asking, in other words, you're asking something different. You're asking if someone wants to exchange gold for gold, not gold for silver.
Well, is it an exchange or a sale? Because we talk about a sale meaning paying for it. We were talking about kesef being produce, and now we're talking about, well, maybe kesef can be kesef. But, I'm still trying to understand, and maybe it's me, the
Okay, so you're
understanding
posing.
on how under halacha, what is the difference between a sale and an exchange?
Okay, so in other words, your hypothetical is not what the Gemara is saying, but you're asking a different, interesting question. If someone, if this, let's say this Bryce has said, if someone has a gold coin and and another person has gold jewelry and they want to make a
Transaction.
a deal, then what is it? That's your question.
Yes.
And the answer logically, again, it's not in this Gemara, but the answer logically is that it can be either. Why? Because you can make a sale. We know that gold is produce. By any means, gold is a chayfetz. It is a chayfetz. You can sell one chayfetz for another chayfetz. It doesn't matter. So if I have a gold coin worth a lot of money and you have gold jewelry, I can sell it to you, you can sell it to me. Also, since gold is the produce, we can call it chalipin because chalipin is chal on an object. So in your situation, it doesn't matter what you call it because both of them are valid as a sale and as an exchange. You immediately own the other.
But a sale requires a kinyan and a chalifin doesn't. So
right.
That's the only thing I know now is the difference between an exchange and a sale. Is there, from a halachic viewpoint, are there any other differences between a sale, requirement for a sale or exchange?
No.
So what do I do in that situation? I mean,
no. Your situation is your situation of gold for gold is. I mean, again, there's no nuance on that because by all accounts, no matter how you want to look at it, gold is a legitimate form of transaction that you acquire immediately. The only question about silver is that since in a sale, silver in and of itself, you can't initiate. I'm emphasizing the word. You can't initiate a deal, but you can conclude a deal. So the Gemara says now there's a difference between chalipin and damim, because if you initiate with gold and then the other party has silver, so in a sale, the silver becomes obligated, but you have to make a kinyan. You have to make a kinyan, and that could be now or later. In a chalipin, you don't have to make a kinyan because the gold portion of the transaction drags the silver along automatically, making it yours today.
But there's another requirement for an exchange. If it is not there with you, it's a promise for the future to deliver. So that is a mandate that says it's damim, not chalifin. Because if it's not there for you to exchange at the same time, if I understood the Gemara correctly, it's saying that any delayed transaction is a promise to pay, and therefore it's damim, not chalifin.
No, let me tell you why that's not the case. Because look at the language of the Gemara of that brisa. The brisa says that if a person exchanges one zov for 25 silver, given shemosha has a zov, since he made a kinyan on the zov, nikne, he has immediately acquired the kesef b'chol makom shehu. That money, silver, in the safe deposit box is yours today.
But it's because he made a kinyan that it's by definition a sale.
But he made a kinyan on the zov, not on the silver. That's why the Gemara asks, if that's the case, that's the classic case of chalipin, because chalipin means you don't have to make a kinyan on the second half of the transaction, i.e. the silver. And if you're saying that my transfer of the gold automatically makes you the owner, nikne, makes you the owner of the silver in the box somewhere else, so you haven't made a kinyan, that presupposes chalipin, not damin. Because
that's why I asked the question about gold versus gold.
But gold versus gold isn't equal to this. In the case of gold versus gold, the reason why this situation arises, and we are having this discussion, is because gold is a chayfetz, silver is not a chayfetz, and we're trying to understand what can you do with silver? Can you acquire it, or is it something that you only are able to do if you actually make a kinyan? We don't know. We're asking. In your case of gold versus gold, there's no question that gold versus gold is chayfetz versus chayfetz. And chayfetz versus chayfetz is different than chayfetz versus money. In the case of chayfetz versus chayfetz, if I have a gold coin and you have a gold watch, and I want to buy your watch, then clearly
but the watch is not a coin, it's not currency. A watch is an object, not currency.
That's right. So in the case of currency, where I give you a gold coin and you want to give me back what, gold coins of a different value? Is that what you're asking?
I was saying jewelry. So you had,
but jewelry is also, jewelry and a watch is the same thing. It's a chayfetz.
Right.
It's not money. So how are you
but gold is in different forms. And so the point is, gold is currency.
But
so
the difference, the jewelry that has a value, it's the gold. If the gold is nominally, we'll call it worth $1, as a jewelry, it might be worth $2 because it's got something beyond the weight of the gold. Even though it's physically might be just gold, the fact that it's formed makes it worth more.
Yes, but we're talking about when weight of gold was measured in olden times, then it had a value that was distinct. As time went on and it became more of a currency, it can be an object too, like in the case of a coin, because of its longevity and the quality it's in, it's an object rather than currency. So it may be worth more than the face value based on the currency. So when does it be? What I'm trying to understand is how is it different? So when it's currency, I understand it's a sale. But if they're both in the form of gold, even different forms of gold, is it can it become an object? And so again, I'm trying to understand the difference. But we know some differences between exchange and sale, but not everything.
Yeah, and the answer is, of course, it can be an object because gold is an object, whether it's jewelry or money. In either case, it is an object. It doesn't matter whether the gold is a coin or whether the gold is an actual chayfetz, meaning let's say a non-coin. In either case, you're exchanging produce for produce, and produce for produce you can exchange with chalipin, right? I give you my chair, and you give me your sewing machine or whatever. In other words, that you can do. And likely that's what it would be, but you can also sell one for the other. I'm giving you the coin and you're giving me the chayfetz, and either of them will trigger the sale because they're both a chayfetz. They're both an object. So there's no question that one object can trigger the sale for another object. And again, it's a little bit of a field from our discussion, but for the clarification point, it's a good question because chayfetz versus chayfetz, there's no issue. I mean, everyone will admit that you can barter or you can sell. Doesn't matter.
It's still a monetary amount. So what's the difference? If a person doesn't have the gold and he has silver, he can convert the silver into gold if he needs the gold. If it's copper, he can change if he has enough copper to buy it. What's the difference? It's a currency. It's a means of payment. Gold is a gold coin is no different than jewelry because it's gold.
That's exactly the point, which is why in Michael's right. So in Michael's scenario, he's asking about an exchange of one produce for another produce, gold coin, gold jewelry, whatever you want to call it. It's an exchange of product for product, not product for money. Even though that coin looks like a money, in halachic terms, it's not money, it's a product. That's what we have to understand. That gold coin is a product, and a product for a product, you don't have any reservation of selling for each other or exchanging for each other, and therefore the kinyan of one person automatically will make the kinyan for the other person. It's with money that we have all of these questions where the Gemara says that exchanging gold for silver, product for money, obligates the other person to pay the money. It obligates him, but you have to have a separate kinyan to make it happen. But if it's chalipin, if the silver coin is being exchanged for the gold, then the gold kinyan automatically makes the silver money yours without a separate kinyan. That's the big difference here in our discussion, and therefore the Gemara jumps on the fact that it says, you know what? That Brisa says that if you make that exchange between one gold coin and 25 silver, and you make the Mashicha, the kinyan, on the gold, then the silver becomes yours, b'chol makom shehu. And those words, b'chol makom shehu, is what giving us all of this concern, because if it's automatically yours wherever it is, then that's chalipin, it's not a monetary exchange. So why is the Gemara and the Brisa saying we must be talking about damim? Simply by the language of the Brisa, we see that it's not talking about damim, it's talking about chalipin because of those words. Nikne b'chol makom shehu. Once you say those words, you're immediately saying chalipin. That's one of the, it's the same thing. So that's the kasha here. Why is the Brisa talking about damim in your view? You yourself are using the words that explain it to be chalipin, explain it to be an exchange. And money can be used for exchange. It can't be used for a sale to make a kinyan, but you can make a kinyan on money if it is an exchange, not a sale. So that's the Gemara's kasha here. It's just not letting go. Why do you say it's damim? It's not damim. So let's just finish the thought, and I think we'll sort of understand it a little bit better. Okay, so then the sky of Gavra Maboyale. So then why does it say Nikta b'chol makom shehu? If it's Bedomim, Nikta b'chesed makom is Chayiv Gavra. So we have the same question we had earlier. Why does it not say Nischayiv? That it obligates you, not that you're kind of it. If you have money sitting in a safe deposit somewhere else, then that money is obligated. And when you go to the box and take out the silver and make the kinyan, then it will be yours, but not before. Why doesn't the Gemara say that? In other words, again, it's the same kasha. So earlier we said that the Gemara is not being precise and is saying what it says, nikne, it means nischayev. So now the Gemara wants to give a slightly different teretz. Not that nischayev and nikne are one and the same. Rather, Omar Ravashi, first of the Y lines. Omar Ravashi gives a different interpretation. Well, olam bedamin. No, we're talking about damim, not chalipin, which is now consistent with everything we're saying. Umay b'chol makom shehu. Then why does it say b'chol makom shehu, which is a trigger for chalipin? Kamo shehu. It doesn't mean wherever it is. It means kamo shehu. It is kamo shehu means as it is, not wherever it is, but kamo shehu. He's using those words in terms of as it is. What does that mean, as it is? Well, we're nuancing words here. What does that mean? So here the Gemara gives an explanation. It's Visi said to him, if in the transaction of one piece of gold for 25 silver, so I have the gold and I give it to you, and you're going to give me the silver, and you say to me, I want new silver. I want freshly minted silver, 25 pieces of freshly minted silver for my gold. Yavina lo. And he has to give it to him. Lo motza yov le ma'arnike yeshana. I cannot now say, you know what? You asked for 25 pieces of brand new minted silver. I'm going to give you 25 pieces of old silver. What's the difference? It's still worth one dinar of zahav. So I want to change the rules and say, you asked for 25 pieces of new silver, and I'm giving you 20, and I agreed, and then I changed my mind, I'm giving you 25 pieces of old silver. Afal gav da'adifamine, says the Gemara, even though old silver may be better than new silver. New silver may have alloys in it that cheapen the value. We know that with pennies and other things. So even though old silver may be better, more valuable even than new silver, my tama the omale lishnon kobeina lahu. So he's saying, no, that you can't switch on me. I need them. I need the new silver in order to age them to make them old silver. So what's the Gemara saying here? New silver, old silver. So the teretz is, again, to understand the Gemara, I'm going to go through Rashi's in a minute. New silver, bright and shiny new silver, fine. Old silver that you have theoretically may have a greater value. Why do I want new silver? Because if I get old silver in the transaction, and I'm going to hold it for years in the future, that old silver may start oxidizing. Okay, in other words, the longer you hold coins, at least in those days, I don't know about today, they were afraid that the coins would, just like copper oxidizes, they were afraid that the coins would have this film or something that would make them less in value. So since in this particular case, this Gemara is telling us that he's exchanging one piece of gold for 25 pieces of silver, but it's his intent to take this silver and to keep it in his box for the next 10 years. So in his mind, he wants new silver because if he holds it for all those years, then it's not going to oxidize and become something he doesn't want. If he gets old silver and holds it for 10 years, then that old silver will oxidize and become maybe less valued. So the Gemara is saying when it says, again, it's interpreting. When it says b'chol makom shehu, it doesn't mean wherever it is b'chol makom shehu, which would presuppose chalipin because you make a kinyan. It means kamo shehu. What he means to say, and again, it's a play on words. That when he says b'chol makom, he means kamo shehu. That I want the money the way I transacted it. Kamo shehu. I said new, you got to give me new, you can't give me old. So whereas in the first round we said that the word kinyan, kaina, can mean obligate. Here we're not saying obligate. Here we're saying it means kone, which means damin, not chalipin. It means damin, right? Because kinyan, he's making the kinyan right away. But he's saying, I want a certain type of coin. I want the new coin, not the old coin. And the chiddush is that he can demand the new coin, and the person who is getting the gold, who's giving the gold, cannot back out and say, no, I've decided to give you old coins. I have to give you the new coins. So that's how the Gemara wants to understand the whole brisa. That the brisa is speaking about damin in the Reisha and in the Seifa. So in the Seifa, when it says nikna, it means nischaya, it means obligate. In the Reisha, when it says chomakim shehu, it doesn't mean wherever it is, which is a trigger for chalipin. It means the item has to be specifically what we agreed upon. If we agreed on new coins, you have to give me new coins, not old coins. Again, this is an exercise in being, as the Gemara is trying to explain to us, in being exact in our terminology. And so the Gemara therefore has to defend the terminology. So when it looks like, wait a minute, this doesn't look like damin, it looks like chalipin, the Gemara is pulling back and saying, no, it's not chalipin, it's damin. Why do I use this language? So the Gemara explains. In one case, nikna means mischayid, and another case, kol makom shehu doesn't mean wherever it is. It means specifically the item that we agreed upon. So the upshot is, and we see this in all of Shas, and I keep repeating it, is that the Gemara uses terminology that is not always exact to what we understand it to be. And I think that's an important point anywhere in Shas, is that when you look at a Gemara, you have to analyze it and understand it. And sometimes the Mefarshim bring out what the Gemara is trying to say, is that the Gemara isn't exacting in using a word and saying this is the word to the exclusion of all else. What do I mean? Nikna, which should mean kinyan, can be nischaya. It can mean obligate. So just a word of caution that's how the Gemara interprets. The Gemara interprets sometimes words that don't mean exactly what you think they mean, and it enlarges the picture. And the same with the Reisha, when it says b'chol makom shehu, which clearly translates in our parlance as wherever it is, doesn't ever it is. It means kamo shehu. The words that I'm saying it means, meaning I want new coins versus old coins. Again, it's a frame of reference. So the Gemara,
can I ask a clarification?
But we take away from this a greater understanding. Yeah, Michael.
In your example of new coins versus old coins, I know that we looked at it both ways, but if I specify new coins that I want in payment, does the Gemara look at that as an exchange? Because old coins, all the value, monetary value is the same regardless of whatever. But if I specify new coins, then I'm actually exchanging property for property, specific property. Is that, and so that would be an exchange, would not require a kinyan. But if it was a sale for so many silver coins, regardless of whether old or new, that would be a sale. Is
right.
That
right? And the Gemara is saying that in this particular case, it's a sale, not an exchange. We want to try to undermine and say, but you can make an exchange of 1 gold for 25 silver, and you can make that exchange so that you don't need to reciprocate the kinyan. Says the Gemara, no, that what that brisa means to say is that I can sell you one gold coin for 25 silver coins, but I can specify what type of coin I want, but still you have to make the kinyan on that coin in whenever let's say now. So in other words, it doesn't automatically mean because I'm saying it's 25 new versus old, that it means chalipin rather than damin. The consistency of our Gemara is that all of our Gemara and Brisa are speaking about a sale, not a chalipin. Why? This all goes to the question, which we'll see again further in a minute, is can you use a coin for chalipin? So remember, in the very beginning, Rav and Levi had a machlokes. Rav said, one says, I think it's Rav, one says, yes, you can use it for chalipin, and the other says you can't use it for chalipin. So in the beginning, we said you can't use it for chalipin because of tsurta, right? Because of the picture on the coin, and therefore there's an uncertainty, and for chalipin you have to have a certainty. You have to have something like a shoe, which is certain. You can't have something that's uncertain, that here today, gone tomorrow. Okay, so then.
But wait, one follow-up. But in the case that you cited, in the new coins, and he gave him old coins.
Right.
In the new coins, so if it is an exchange, he can reject the transaction because he didn't get new coins in response, he get old coins. If it's a sale, since that is common currency value, and both new and old are worth the same based on the stated value, that he's considering that a sale. So isn't that a distinction with a difference?
Well, the distinction here is whether you're kona it right away or not. So that's where I think maybe we're a little off track, is that the proof in what it is whether or not you need to do a proactive act to get those silver coins. The gold coin was he made a kinyan. That's for sure. Did you make a kinyan on the silver, new or old? Says the Gemara that the way the language of the brisa read, it would seem to say that this is an exchange, and therefore you don't have to make a kinyan, new or old. Forget new or old. You don't have to make a kinyan because it's automatic, because it's chalipin. The brisa wants to instruct us that just because we use the word b'chol makom shehu, which by definition would suggest chalipin, that's what it is, b'chol makom shehu. It's yours wherever it is, as opposed to, oh no, it's got to be here because you've got to make a kinyan. Says the Gemara, no, that's not what the brisa means. The brisa means that the money is here. It's here in front of us. And you have to make a reciprocal kinyan on the money, otherwise it's only an obligation. But the reason why it uses the word b'kol makom shehu, it doesn't mean wherever it is. It means specifically the kind of money that I demand in this sale. So according to what you just said, that's correct. If we do this sale and you give me old coins instead of new, we don't have a deal. Because you reneged on the agreement. You reneged.
So that's an exchange, not a sale. Because if it was a sale, you would be approved regardless, as long as the currency was the same.
As long as the currency was what we agreed upon, exactly.
Well, wait, what we agreed upon, if we agreed upon new silver coins, even they're both the same, and you didn't give new, if it's an exchange, because that's the specific exchange property you're exchanging, you can reject the deal. If it's a sale, then it's a matter of value. And from a legal standpoint, it would seem that you can't reject it because he supplied old coins versus
no, but that's not what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara is saying that if regardless of whether it's a sale or an exchange, we have an agreement. The agreement is my gold for your new silver. New silver. That's the agreement. If you don't supply me with new silver, we don't have a deal, whether it is a sale or an exchange, because you reneged on the deal. The only thing the Gemara is pointing out is that the language of the Brisa would seem to suggest that that silver, whether it's new or old, becomes yours right away without doing anything. And the Gemara wants to say that's not the case. That's not what the Brisa meant to say. The Brisa meant to say, you still have to comply with our agreement and give me new coins, not old coins. The difference is that, do I have to do an act or do I not have to do an act? In the case of a sale, I have to do an act. I have to make a kinyan on those coins. And in the case of an exchange, I do not have to make a kinyan. It's automatic. But you can't now say, wait a minute, if it's a sale, then the coins don't have to be new, they can be old. No, that's not true.
So the kinyan doesn't add any power to the deal.
The kinyan doesn't
add any power to the deal. The fact that you made a kinyan versus not a kinyan.
No, it does not add any power to the deal. And I gave you an example of where there's a chilek between a sale and a exchange. That example is if you want to now immediately take that money and use it for a transaction with a third party, you cannot do it with damim unless you make a kinyan. You can do it with chalipin without a kinyan because it became yours automatically. So if you had an instant deal right after you make this transaction, you have a fantastic deal that you can immediately make a windfall profit. You're stuck in the case of damim if you didn't make the kinyan because it's an obligation, not a reality. But if you did a chalipin, it's mine. I can immediately take the money that's in that safe deposit box or wherever it is. It doesn't matter. I didn't make a kinyan, but it's mine. I can now use it for a third-party transaction. That's the big difference, so that you understand. That's the big difference. But the question of new coins versus old coins, that doesn't change. If I say new coins, I mean new coins. If you don't give me new coins, we don't have a deal. Not if it's a chalipin and not if it's damim. It has to be new coins.
Unless the person takes the old coins and does exactly what you said, turn around, then they've accepted.
Exactly. He has that option. If he wants to waive his requirement of new coins because he takes the old coins and immediately buys something for a windfall profit, he's entitled to do that. He has that flexibility. But barring that, I'm giving you the example. Barring that,
that's helpful.
Right, he can insist on the new coins. So
I've got possibly a modern analogy, which is there are certain stores and different types where, forget about credit cards and all that, because there's fees that's different than money, but where they'll say, we won't accept any currency, any bills larger than 20s. It's not that they don't see that a $100 bill is worth $100. They're worried about counterfeiting and stuff. So they make this policy. Right. And so if you walk in there and you buy $100 of merchandise and you go to hand them a $100 bill, they'll say, no, we can't take that. That's no good. And if you took the merchandise, you now owe us $100, but it's got to be 520s, not one $100 bill, even though it's all the currency of the land.
Right. So in other words, every deal has its requirements. So you can make up the requirements, give me only 20s, give me this, give me that, give me new money, give me old money. You have the lay of the land to do what you want. The point is that A, you have to fulfill that particular deal, otherwise you don't have a deal, A. And B, again, in the real world, this doesn't apply. But in our world here, in our discussion, in the real world, if you make that transaction, do we care? I mean, do the parties care? Chalipin, damim, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We're nuancing and saying it does matter. It does matter because we are trying to insist that a coin is more than just money. It's something else. It can be a chayfetz. It can be an object which can be used in a barter, even if it can't be used in a sale. That's where we are differing from a just regular transaction in the real world, where it doesn't make a difference. In our parlance, it makes a difference because money is not always money, only money. money is money, but money is a chayfetz. In the real world, who cares? In our world, we care because we make this distinction that a kinyan can only be with a chayfetz, not with money. But if you're going to say that a coin can be a chayfetz, then you can make a kinyan, i.e. chalipin, but not a sale. In a sale, money is always money. You can't nuance and say, oh, it doesn't mean money, it means something else. It is money, period. No distinction. So that's why we're going through all of these sort of ramifications to get to the point. And the Gemara's conclusion right now is that our sugya is strictly about damim, strictly about money, even though the words of the Gemara might appear to be chalipin. The Gemara at every turn has answered and say, no, it doesn't mean chalipin, it means damim. So what you're thinking is chalipin is damim, and here's the reason. Either because the word kinyan means obligation, okay, or the word kinyan doesn't necessarily mean when it says chomotam shehu, wherever it is, it doesn't mean wherever it is, which is a key phrase for chalipin. It means the actual chayfetz has to be what I say it is. But to you, Michael, and generally speaking, so we've concluded and said we're speaking about damim, but make no mistake that the seller here of the Zov can't do a quick one and say, no, we agreed on new, but I'm giving you old. That makes the transaction void because you didn't fulfill the conditions of the transaction. You have to give him new in order to make the transaction. But when you give him the new, then he certainly has to make a kinyan on it. Otherwise, it's still obligation. And my example of the chiluk of being able to flip it into something else is just to show whether or not you own it outright, or you own it when you do an act. And if you own it when you do an act, then it's not yours yet. And if it's not yours, you can't now make another transaction. You have to first make a kinyan in order to make a transaction. In the case of a chalipin, you don't have to make a kinyan. And we know that, again, in the real world, people are buying and selling things without ever seeing the money. In other words, the money transacts from A to B to C to D, so that an initial transaction between A and B winds up being a totally different transaction later between C and D, and we have no halachic problem with it, because, again, in the non-halachic world, that doesn't matter. In the halachic world, that could be a problem. Again, you have to look at what the Shulchan Aruch says ultimately. But in our discussion, if we're talking about damim, and then people make multiple transactions with the same money without making a kinyan, arguably, it's a bracha levatala. Now, the halacha, again, I'll look at the halacha and see what the halacha ultimately says, because we transact like that all the time. In the lashon of the Gemara, that would not be okay, because you didn't make a kinyan on that damim. You have to make the kinyan. Without making the kinyan, it's not yours. How can you now use that money for another transaction if it's not yours? That's the real question. And again, we'll look at that for next week. But you understand the subtlety of it is that it's kind of like a davar shebola olam. How can I transact on something that either hasn't happened or I don't have? I'm just assuming I have it, and I'm immediately going to transact with something else. That's playing fast and loose, and the halacha, the Gemara doesn't approve of it. Again, the halacha today, halacha l'maisa, it could be different. And we'll take a look at the halacha l'maisa to see whether or not you can do that. But you understand that under the Gemara's circumstance, that would not be appropriate, because you can't transact with something that you didn't make a kinyan on. And this is what's interesting about all of our discussions, is that the Gemara wants to make it clear that a transaction has a beginning and an end. And since we're talking about damim, not chalipin, in all cases of damim, says the Gemara, there has to be an equality between me and you. And so, Michael, in your case of gold for gold, that's not a problem. because gold for gold is a product for a product. Fine, good. But when you're dealing in unequal terms, gold for money, then in order to make the transaction complete, each side has to do what it's obligated to do, i.e. make a kinyan. One person's kinyan doesn't work for the other guy. And since the product has to be the catalyst for the transaction, we make a kinyan on the catalyst, and then the other guy reciprocates and makes a kinyan on the money. Now, to be sure, the guy who made the kinyan on the gold can't rescind and say, I'm taking the money back. Can't do it. That money is in limbo, but it doesn't belong to the guy with the gold, and it doesn't yet completely belong to the guy with the silver, but the guy with the silver has what we call dibs. He has the right. And we're going to see in the Gemara next week, I'll give you a preview. One of the reasons why silver, in the case of Damin, can't be the trigger for the event is because what happens to the product if the product gets destroyed before it gets into the hands of the guy, of the new owner? So the guy who got the money will say, not my problem. I made a transaction. I made a kinyan on the money. It's yours. There was a fire in the warehouse. Your problem, not mine. So you can see why the Chazal, why the Gemara, at the time that they were doing this, said, wait a minute. We can't allow a transaction. And again, we'll see this actually in the Gemara, but this is the preview. One of the important reasons why silver can't be the catalyst to the transaction for the product is because the integrity of the product has to be protected. And it's not protected if I own the silver and you are now the owner of the gold without doing a kinyan. Wait a minute, that gold gets destroyed. Who's responsible? Not me. I made a kinyan. So therefore, in their wisdom, the Gemara says, you know what? The product has to be the catalyst. Once the product's in the catalyst, it's in your hands, you're the shomer. You protect it, it's yours. Money, we're not worried that something's going to happen if there's a fire. Although maybe it'll melt, but okay, we're not worried about that. But we're worried, and we'll see in the Gemara later, we're worried about the product. Anyway.
That makes sense, actually, because the silver, even if you say it's got to be new silver, so you end up with different new silver, but it's exactly equivalent. Whereas the product, you can never say it's exactly the same.
Exactly, right. Again, I'm just giving you an understanding as we go forward, but that's one of the great motivators for this whole discussion, is because if the product isn't the first to be transacted, then the danger is that product may wind up getting lost, and then the new owner cannot have a claim on the old owner because he technically owned it. So therefore, he has to be the first to take the step, and the money follows suit. Anyway, so that's where we are. And Mitzvah Shem, again, we'll pick this up, but you can see the thread here is where we're going, and we'll just continue on. We haven't finished with this, so yet we'll continue on next week.